Hello and welcome to the Huxley Speaker Series. My name is Stefan Freeland. I'm the coordinator of the series, and today it is my pleasure to welcome Derek Moscato, who's from the Western's Journalism Department, who's going to introduce today's speaker. Thank you, Derek. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's talk, and I'm really pleased that Mike Sato is joining us for the Huxley Speaker Series in tandem with the Salish Sea Institute. Mike's environmental media background and ongoing journalism projects speak to the breadth of opportunity for would-be advocates, communicators, and journalists in our region. They also speak to his commitment to the cross-border Salish Sea ecosystem, as well as providing a platform for pressing social, political, and economic topics. Mike is a graduate of Reed College in Portland. He is the managing editor of the Salish Current, a nonprofit news platform serving the communities of Whatcom, San Juan, and Skagit counties. He is also the curator of the weekday news blog, Salish Sea News and Weather. And I encourage all of you to check out both of these media outlets if you have not already and sign up for his daily email service. We'll try to put links in the chat. Previous to these endeavors, he held editorial leadership positions at the Island Record and the Seattle Sun, and Mike served in influential public communication roles with Seattle City Light, Puget Sound Water Quality Authority, Hawaiian Electric Company, and People from Puget Sound. On top of all of this, Mike has made some quite special contributions to the Western community. Through the Salish Current, for example, he regularly mentors Western interns and recent graduates. And Mike was generous enough to participate in my recent study about the cross-border media ecosystem published by Western's Border Policy Research Institute. All of this is to say that Mike is truly providing a journalistic template for engagement with people, place, and planet right here from the Pacific Northwest. So with all of that said, thank you, Mike, for joining us today.
Boy, that's very nice. Thank you very much, Derek. I mean, that's I hope I can live up to this. I mean, it's really great. I've heard that this is the safest and the cheapest entertainment of this hour, because whatever I'm going to say is not going to entertain you. Hopefully it will entertain you, but won't, endanger you in any way. So you can pour the glass of Burgundy or Chablis and mix up that gin and tonic, and we'll get going. I just wanted to take a look at the title that I a long time ago said I was going to talk about, and to read all about it. What's the news of the Salish Sea? And it's a big title for a short talk. And if anybody was expecting I'd talk about orcas and salmon and eagles, I won't be doing that this time. I'll be talking about, the news business in this transboundary region, what news is, and why I think it's very, very important that we deal with the question of, what we have here in terms of the news business. Derek said some very nice things and gave a very good background. I like to say that you got to start off and very early, and there's a line that you start off with and saying, I was born at a very early age. But I have the benefit of being able to start with a line that says I was born in the same hospital as President Obama. And that's a good way to start because it allows me to say that, no, it wasn't in Kenya, but it was in Honolulu, Hawaii. So I grew up in Honolulu. I did move to the Northwest to go to college and then spent my time on Lopez Island. And as we've gone through sort of this long resume of wonderful things that I've done and all of that, at the end of it, I end up feeling like I'm really this old guy that has just done a lot of things. And hopefully some of the things that I've done along the way in terms of being on opposite sides of the news fence, both being on the reporting side as well as on the other side as a communication person, as well as being a news junkie, gives me some leeway to say a few things about that. So I really have spent the last 10 years or so after I finished up with People for Puget Sound, with a consultancy in terms of media communications. I continued to put out this blog of environmental news clippings about the transboundary region, which is really our Salish Sea News and Weather. And in the last year, I've had the opportunity really to be a managing editor for what we call Salish Current, which is a not-for-profit news service that is now serving Whatcom, San Juan, and Skagit counties that was launched a year ago by my wife, Amy Nelson. So we recount over the time you spend working in the news business. So we've seen it from different angles, and this is basically the storyline. The news business here in this region and throughout the country, and what people think of as news has changed, and not necessarily for the best interests of our communities. Let me go back to the 1970s and start with my first experience in the news. In the San Juan Islands, at that point, there were 3 different locally owned newspapers serving a county of only 3,800 residents. It was the Friday Harbor Journal, the Island Sounder, and the paper I worked for, the Island Record. Each of us competed for advertising subscriptions and reporting the news. The big issue there was land use planning, namely shoreline management and comprehensive land use planning. These are the big news items, and all 3 papers reported about it. The county commission, the planning department, the planning department, the planning commission, as well as all of the things that were going on in the islands: births, deaths, awards, graduations, weddings, and police and court news. These were community papers with lively editorial stances and letters pages. Today, there are still 3 county publications serving a population now of about 18,000 residents. However, all 3 are owned by one company, Sound Publishing, a subsidiary of Black Press Group, which is headquartered in Vancouver, British Columbia. These 3 papers now have 1 editor and 1 reporter, and very, very little actual county news. Sound Publishing and Black Press Group are good examples of how the news business has changed. Sound Publishing bought and operates many of the weekly publications in the Puget Sound Basin, as well as the Daily Everett Herald and the Port Angeles Daily News. Black Press Group bought and operates almost all the newspapers in Hawaii and Alaska. Black Press Group also bought and operates the weekly papers just on the other side of the border in White Rock, Surrey, Langley, and Cloverdale. The business model is this: Sound Publishing, or Black Press Group, and larger media companies, they buy small papers in target markets, put them under one operating management. They gain economies of scale to reduce administrative and staffing overhead. As long as revenue from advertising and subscriptions exceed the amount of expenses for operations and provides sufficient return on investment, it's a good and profitable business. It's like the radio station business, the grocery business, the entire business of mergers and acquisitions. We need to keep in mind that the news business is a business. Do you remember Mr. Micawber from Dickens's David Copperfield? He said, when annual income exceeds expenditure, what's the result but happiness? When annual income is exceeded by annual expenditure, what's the result? Misery. Sadly, there's been quite a bit of misery in the news business in the last 20 years. That's despite population growth and certainly no lack of news stories to write. So what happened? About 15 years ago, I gave a talk to a University of Washington Communications 110 class. I asked a class of about 100, how many of you regularly read the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, which was a daily paper in Seattle at that time, or the Seattle Times? About 4 or 5 students raised their hands, as did the instructor and myself. Then I asked, how many of you have a Facebook page? And about 3/4 of the class raised their hands. I won't ask the same question here. When Amy Nelson did her research before launching Salish Current, she asked a lot of people locally where they got their news from. A surprising number said Facebook, which is odd because Facebook doesn't write news. What's happened over the last few years is that news reported by trained journalists and editors has been overwhelmed and drowned in the rising sea of websites and blogs that allow anyone to be a publisher, editor, and reporter. Real news, the intellectual property of the news business, lost its currency under a tsunami of booming internet information. At the same time, internet marketing exploded and newspaper advertising plummeted. To remain profitable, owners shrank their newsrooms. Circulation dropped. Declining circulation, plummeting advertising, and shrinking newsrooms felt like entering a death spiral. Larger news publications, just like Sound Publishing, using the business model, they pursued successive acquisitions of weaker publications, looking to find economies of scale in different markets to maintain profitability. Here, in the town where we live, sits the Bellingham Herald newspaper. Back 25 years ago, there were about 140,000 people living in Whatcom County, and the Herald had a staff of about 30 people in its newsroom. Today, there are about 225,000 people living in this county, and the Herald has a staff of 5 in its newsroom. It has a daily paper circulation of less than 9,000 subscribers and an online paid subscription of about 2,200 subscribers. The Herald has been bought and sold in its recent history, first by the Knight Ridder Company, then by the McClatchy Company, all out-of-state media conglomerates. Most recently, the McClatchy Company declared bankruptcy and was bought by Chatham Asset Management, a hedge fund company. Just to the south of us, the daily Skagit Valley Herald serves readers in Skagit County. It once was owned locally by the Stedham family, but is now owned by Adams Publishing, which is headquartered in Tennessee. It has about the same number of news staff as the Bellingham Herald, but since the COVID shutdown, staff works fewer hours a week. Adams also owns the weekly community papers in Anacortes and in Stanwood. There are 2 daily papers north of us. The Victoria Times Colonist is owned by Glacier Media, working out of Vancouver, and it serves the Greater Victoria Regional District. The Vancouver Sun serves the Greater Vancouver metropolitan area. The Sun is owned by Post Media Network, headquartered in Toronto. Do you remember Chatham Asset Management, the owners of the Bellingham Herald? And it turns out the owners of 49% of the Seattle Times. Chatham Asset Management also owns 2/3 of Post Media Network. These news businesses are struggling because their business model of advertising and circulation as revenue has failed. As a result, the news they report has suffered. To survive, they have moved online and reduced print operations. They're trying to bolster income by requiring online subscriptions. Others have also turned to the communities they serve and to businesses and charitable foundations to help support their newsroom operations. And yet, what's interesting is that 2 local weekly publications, the Linden Tribune Ferndale News and the Northern Light in Blaine, they remain locally owned and continue to be supported by the communities they serve. Why? Because they report the news of their communities and are a part of their communities. Does it matter that a community has news, real news, reported by trained journalists and edited by trained editors? I think it does, and here's why. Without local news, a community has no way of knowing what is happening locally. When I worked at Seattle City Light promoting conservation, there were small, locally owned neighborhood papers throughout Seattle My job was to visit and brief the reporters and editors and encourage them to write stories and editorials about energy conservation. When I was successful, they did report and inform their community readers. At the Puget Sound Water Quality Authority, I visited reporters and editors at newspapers in nearly every town and city in the Puget Sound Basin. And the papers wrote stories about the Puget Sound Plan, the urgent need for action, and the need for citizen involvement. That was the case working for People for Puget Sound. We launched a citizen activist campaign with a voyage on a sailboat visiting ports of call around the Sound, where there were newspapers to tell the campaign's story. But that news landscape began changing. With the rise of the internet came the loss of local ownership, smaller news staffs, less local news, more reliance on reprinting news releases or just ignoring news releases, and a blurring of the lines between and among real news, news releases, and opinion. In Bellingham, 5 people in a newsroom cannot report on the local news of a county of 225,000 people. They do the best they can, bless them, but the reporting is basically reactive, and that doesn't serve the community. In the 70s, when 3 newspapers in the San Juans reported the news for 3,800 people, the news about land use and development led to arguments in the community, candidate elections, recall elections, and lawsuits. People in the community took differing positions on the issues, but shared the same facts as reported in the news on the issues. This is the value of real local news. There is something to be said for a community sharing a common body of facts contained in a well-written news story. It's called the 5 W's: the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why of a news account. You know the saying, you can have your own opinions, but you can't have your own facts. News reporting has never been perfect, but it provides a common basis of facts and a language with which a community can talk to and talk among itself. Today, here in this community of the Salish Sea, we are in danger of no longer knowing what the local news is. Not only not knowing what our elected officials have done, but we also don't know what they are going to do or why. Reporting real news and editing real news costs money. There are lots of writing on the internet that a lot of people consider news. The citizen journalism, volunteer event notices, business and government news releases, partisan and ideological blogs and opinion essays. These don't cost money. They have their place on the internet and in our community, but they're not news. Because real news costs money, there's a danger that real news will eventually die. When that happens, when we get to the point of no longer sharing news about our community, we're in danger of becoming a babel, a multiplicity of geographic, ideological, and cultural bubbles confirming each other's biases. There'll be no shared facts and no language that guides civil discourse for civic decision-making. The language shared by people upon which our democracy is based on dies. The traditional models of news paid for by advertising and subscriptions is dying. But there are other news business models springing up locally and around the nation. There are at least 300 not-for-profit news services which belong to a national organization called the Institute for Nonprofit News. These news services range from the very large, like ProPublica, to the regional, like Investigate West, to the statewide, like Crosscut, to the very local, like our Salish Current. At Salish Current, the website is freely accessible. Subscribers get a free weekly newsletter that highlights news articles written by paid freelance reporters, news headlines from the region, and commentaries written by community members. Support comes from readers, local donors, and foundations, sort of like public radio, but without the spring and fall fund drive. Will this business model succeed to bring back local news reporting? We'll work hard, but nothing is guaranteed. Is it important we succeed? I think so, and here's why. Consider where we are sitting here in Whatcom, San Juan, and Skagit counties. Guy Ochogrosso, chairman of our local Chamber of Commerce, likes to talk about how we are situated an hour and a half on a freeway between two major metropolitan centers. We have Mount Baker to the east and the Straits to the west. Draw a circle and we sit in the middle of about 7 million souls. The border will open after this round of COVID is beaten back. Change is coming, and our city of subdued excitement will be in the middle of that change. Just look at what's planned for the Bellingham Bay waterfront. Change is coming, and decisions made or not made today and tomorrow will determine what this place will be like 25 years from now. How will you know who is planning what if it's not reported? Where will you learn about the allocation of water in the Nooksack Basin, the future development of Cherry Point and the refineries? When the second Canadian pipeline to Burnaby will be built? How will the massive port terminal expansion just north of the border, how will it change things? How much more oil and gas will Canada be shipping out through the straits? Who's making vessel traffic safety a priority out to the Pacific? And what about high-speed trains crossing the border? A new free trade economics zone, maybe, between White Rock, BC to Bellingham, Washington. We could go on and on and on, but that's a talk for another time. This kind of local news won't be reported on in detail by the Vancouver Sun or by the Seattle Times. It's the kind of real local news that needs to be written here for our communities here. I'm hoping that this kind of real news, factual and independent, is the kind of news our community not only needs, but wants, and that our community will support it, whether it's done by the Bellingham Herald, the Skagit Valley Herald, the Linden Tribune, the Northern Light, or the Salish Current. That's the work ahead. And for me right now, that's the state of the media in the Salish Sea. And for that, thanks for listening. Be interested in hearing what your questions might be and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Interesting. Yeah, we're all. Yeah, how does the news media business survive? I mean, yeah, but you have to, right? Isn't that we all think so. You got to somehow figure out a way of making it work. So yes, we are open for questions from the floor if there are some, if people have questions. Someone says, you mentioned reactive news. Can you elaborate on what you mean by reactive news a bit?
I think that the idea that, newspapers are there and newsrooms are very good in covering, fires and accidents and things like that. And there's things that come off the scanner. And I think that's an easy way of reporting the news, primarily because people are interested in it. At the same time, I mean, what you have is news that is, news that something's happening, and so you go out and cover it, and that's good. The kind of news that take, for example, the homeless situation, but the homeless situation erupts in terms of the eviction that needs to go on when you have to clear out the yard at the city hall and at the library. Those are things that are going on, and you go out there and you report that news. And I think the Bellingham Herald did that very, very well. I think the same thing holds true for when you have news like what's going on with the COVID vaccine and all of that. I think that's something news does very well, because people want to know that stuff. The difficulty of really doing the kind of news that really makes a longer term difference is the kind of news that follows what is going on during the deliberative process at the city council, at the county council, at the port of Bellingham, the elected officials. I mean, what is going on? What is what's going on in terms of development? What's going on in terms of the businesses? What's coming down the pike? Because usually we're given the chance of how shall I say reacting to the fact that, oh, all of a sudden here's this big building that's now there's groundbreaking going on for that. Where'd that come from? Well, it came from someplace else, probably about 2 years in advance. Now, that kind of reporting is the kind of reporting that actually gives citizens the ability to be able to have a say in what goes on in the government. It takes an incredible amount of investment to do that kind of reporting. And I think that that's part of the problem, because I think that investing in that kind of reporting really does cost money. But in the longer term, I mean, it's non-reactive. I mean, it's really long-term, deeper reporting. It's data dive reporting as well. What is going on, but what are the consequences of the decisions that are being made right now or are going to be made, in the future? And that's the kind of real news reporting that I think we're sorely lacking, that we used to have in the future, in the past.
Yes, there's a trend towards online news, behind a paywall. Whether it's the New York Times, et cetera, that you monetize, you are selling your news to subscribers, and the concern then is that anyone who's not able or willing to pay for that some of the news is accessible to more people than others, and so the economical choice is to go get it where it's free, but free is not the same as news. Do you have a sense of how to thread that needle?
Well, I think it's very difficult. I mean, I think that that's one of the things that nonprofit news is dealing with. Who's going to pay for the news? I mean, is the news something that the original model was that advertisers and subscribers to papers and things like that. But advertising basically paid for the news, and of course, news in that respect was was a vehicle for putting advertising in front of people. Who's going to pay for the news? And there are various ways of doing it, because actually, I mean, I think it's fair that the New York Times charges for its intellectual property, and the Washington Post does the same thing, and Bellingham Herald does. But it's very difficult, because not everybody is going to buy into that. And if you were to ask, I mean, whether or not you're going to pay for something that, that you're going to do, people make a decision, and, it's all of that. So, I mean, if in fact people are not going to read that kind of news, I mean, what is what kind of news gets funded? There are some other models. I mean, the BBC, for example, is funded by the government. National Public Radio is a kind of hybrid. Part of it is public funding, part of it is is foundation, part of it is sponsors, part of it is all of that. And so you have different funding models. I mean, whether or not you think of news and one of the ways of looking at it is whether you think of news as being, a public institution. I mean, like a library, like a museum. I mean, it should be publicly funded in that respect. It's a funny line. It's not an easy one, because I think that if we all had the answer to it, I mean, we would say that, well, yeah, I mean, send the money, we'll do news. But just as much as, if a big advertiser, Waste Management, wants to pay for the news, I mean, you might think that there's something something creepy about that, because the news may not necessarily be, exactly independent. So how do you ensure that there's going to be independence in the news, following journalistic standards, and transparency becomes really, really important as to, what the credibility of your news coverage is, who's paying for it. And I think that you can have a number of people, a number of institutions, a number of entities paying for the news, as long as it is clearly transparent. I mean, so there is, where the money's coming from. So whether the coverage, you yourself, the reader, judges the coverage as to whether or not it is, it is impartial, whether it is fact-based, whether it is independently written, whether whether it's real news in that respect. So I think that, it's still a process, and it's very, very difficult, because paywalls, I mean, yeah, it cuts down things, but you're actually, paying for intellectual property. I mean, you pay for a book, you pay for a magazine, you don't get that for free. You pay for that intellectual property. News that the New York Times or anybody else puts out that's real news is paid for, should be paid for.
Yeah, and maybe there's ways of subsidizing, like you say, through nonprofits, so that there's access points for people that, that's a good thing too. So there was a question complimenting, Crosscut's been doing great work, and a surprise to hear that it was statewide. Can you speak to what Crosscut's business model, philosophy, structure for operation?
Well, I mean, Crosscut is, Crosscut is part of the KCTS, Pacific Media Group, or whatever it's called. So, it started out, I mean, Crosscut is not for profit. I mean, it is that model. It also, by melding with KCTS and public television, it has a benefit of having, pretty deep pockets around it. So the reporting that it's doing, and I think if you take a look at it, I mean, Crosscut is looking at, is looking at deeply at certain issues, urban issues, and doing a really, really good job of going deep on those issues. I mean, it's accessible. I mean, you can go to Crosscut and you can read it. I mean, it doesn't cost you anything to do that. You don't get complete coverage. I mean, I think that you have to, sort of your day of reading, is probably to take the Seattle Times, is to also take the Bellingham Herald, and also to read Crosscut, and to, tune in, or else go on to KNKX and KUOW and public radio, and check out, a number of news sources and all of that, which is not a bad news diet. It doesn't take you that long, but I think that, that's the kind of thing. I think Investigate West is also going very, very deep into some of the, regional issues, that have to do with climate, we have to do with, equity issues and all of that. So, I mean, there's a patchwork quilt right now. Nobody does everything, but there is enough going on right now that you're getting a sense of what that coverage could be like if you really do have independent, if you have independent news, that's written in a way that's, that's deep enough to give you, a fairly good understanding of what the issues are and where things are moving forward. I think that one of the areas in which we have real difficulty is, is knowing, I mean, the legislative coverage. I mean, it'd be really great to have, deeper legislative coverage to really know, what things are coming up before the bills are actually, adopted.
Yeah, right. And that, there seems to be that there's a split coming of sort of, you still have local news, but it may not have the newsroom staff to cover state news or or broader. A question on that note came in, said, do you see a role for local news in reporting science and technology trends that are not local, but affect our environmental conditions? So the bigger picture stories that impact all of us.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it's really, where what your scope is. Yeah, obviously, I mean, what you really would like is you would like, a local story that, is generated locally. I mean, a story that really has some, has roots in the community. A good example is, I mean, take what goes on at the university. I mean, there's a lot of things going on at the university that is really, people in the community don't know what's going on at the university. Why is that? I mean, you got the Western Front, but there's a lot more going on at the university that has a lot to do with the Bellingham community and the Whatcom County community, and even, I mean, in the community. I mean, what is that? I mean, is it just that, I mean, there's nobody, no reporter goes and asks that question? I mean, I think that, if you had a very robust type of, of local news coverage, I mean, the university would be prime for, as an area of getting both scientific news, getting, policy news. I mean, all the things that the university does, and not, I mean, I think that was a, that's the kind of thing that would be a good beat. So, I mean, I think that that's a kind of local thing. I'm not really quite sure I understand the question in the sense in which, I mean, is it something that locally one could cover, one should cover, scientific or environmental issues? I think if it's, I think if it's in your backyard in Bellingham Bay, yes, you definitely should be doing that. If, I mean, if it's somebody who's doing research at Shannon Point that really has some incredible, incredible relevance to all of Puget Sound, definitely. I mean, I think that you should be doing that. Do you have the kind of talent? Do you have the kind of reporting, wherewithal to be able to cover that kind of story? I think we're going back to the same thing about what your investment is in your newsroom and whether you can do something like that. It's a really good example that, we weren't, every 2 years, I mean, there is the ecosystem conference that where the, we're basically, the Canadians and, and Washingtonians would get together on ecosystem research and all the issues of the transboundary of the Salish Sea. And that's, one of those wonderful things. This year, I know I had to do it online because of COVID. And, and it's sort of like, well, I mean, it's sort of like, it was really nice to be able to all get together, and we all will get together again. In good old days, I mean, there were a number of beat reporters that would spend the time at the conference and write stories out of that. They were sent from the Seattle Times or the Seattle PI, or they came from the Vancouver Sun. I mean, that's the kind of thing. But, will we have the same kind of, coverage at a time when we can all get together either in Vancouver or in Seattle to have that kind of, probably not. I mean, there will be maybe 1 or 2 stories, but not the kind of, depth. And primarily because there are no more environmental reporters, or very few environmental reporters that are dedicated to an environmental beat. I mean, I think that that's one of the things that over the last 20 years that I've worked, you see that happening. I mean, there's less and less coverage in that sense, detailed coverage on an ongoing basis. And that's, that's on the science side. I think on the policy side and the governmental side, I think you have the same kind of thing. I mean, you don't hear very much about the Puget Sound cleanup effort anymore. I think that's, I think that that's a result of not having, active reporters being able to cover the beat.
And do you see partnerships between smaller local news agencies with the larger, branch news conglomerates? Is there a way of getting some of that content into the local papers, or are we just going to become 2 different entities?
No, I think partnerships. I think partnerships and ways of stretching the coverage and pooling resources, and not necessarily having to merge, but to pool resources is going to be a real key thing about how real news can really extend itself. Because I think that that's, I mean, it's very hard. I mean, it's hard among any kind of groups to find ways of working together, because, sometimes things are not necessarily symmetrical. And I think that, I think at Salish Current, we always take a look at, other like publications that we can, that if there are articles we can share with, we will share with. If even if when KNKX, for example, is working on a story, I mean, we have the opportunity at some time to to basically collaborate. We're always looking for that kind of opportunity, and that's just natural along the way. And I think that that's some of the ways in which we're going to be able to we're able to actually extend real news and the resources for it anyway.
Any suggestions for how to get young people more interested in reading real news?
I was surprised. I mean, I mean, no, I mean, I don't have any suggestions because everybody comes to it in their own way, and I'm really surprised because what I'm surprised is we work with young journalism students and graduates, and people are quite into the news. They want to do meaningful news coverage, and you have to believe that I mean, young people are not immune to interest in these things, but I think that a lot of it is I there's a lot of there's a lot that goes back to news literacy. I mean, there always would be newspapers in the classroom or news in the classroom. The thing of of even having a discussion about current events and having a kind of approach to current events that really has something to do with understanding what the news is and how the news comes about. And I think that we've lost that. I think adults are growing up losing that. And I think that I mean, we always think that, well, if we get it back in the schools, if if there were some ability of talking about the news of the day in a class to make it relevant, maybe you build in that sense a sense of inquiry, a sense of critical thinking about why something happens, why people say what they do, how does the news written in a way that really tells you something, and having a discussion about that. I always think that that's one of the things that we would certainly like. I mean, we all grapple with this thing because it's a question of relevance, but if it's not put in front of you, you're never going to even know it's there. I mean, you're not gonna put news on TikTok, okay? I mean, you're not gonna do that. So it's gonna be not everybody is going to get interested in it, but you do want enough people interested in it so that we have a way of discussing things, and we have a way of having decision making in a community, so that everybody isn't running around in their own little bubble thinking they have all the answers.
So a pair of questions we're going to kind of weave together. The first is how do we combat the distrust of the news? And then a second, that if we fail to report local news and accurately, what does our future look like? What if we lose local news? So how do we keep this going?
What is the distrust? What is the distrust of news? I mean, is that the you know, it's hard. I mean, if in fact, if in fact one would say that, well, you can't trust anything, then I think that you probably can't trust news. I mean, if that's the case, uh, I think that out of journalism school, I mean, there are ways of, writing a story that meets what you might consider to be the standards in terms of corroboration, in terms of research, in terms of, establishing facts. I mean, maybe, maybe that's a question of news literacy I mean, one of the things that we found along the way was, I mean, people not really knowing what news is. And so, I mean, if one were to be able to have a discussion about how real news is done, would that increase, credibility of real news? Well, hopefully it would. On the other hand, I mean, the other thing we found out was, I mean, people did not know how really why news costs money. I mean, because after all, we open up a newspaper, we turn on the radio, and we watch television. And there's news. I mean, it just appears. Well, there's a lot that goes on before it just appears, and that's the money. That's why it costs money part. That's why it's intellectual property part. But, I mean, if in fact people don't understand what news is, then it becomes really, easy in a way to distrust it if you don't know that real news has standards. And if news is put together, or whatever, I'm going to put, those curly quotes around it, in terms of, quote, news, doesn't meet those standards, then, I mean, it is to be distrusted. Part of the problem seems to be that you distrust news when, it's really not news, but it's opinion. One of the ways in which it's opinion when somebody has the pronoun I in there. I mean, obviously that's opinion, but sometimes, I mean, people take commentary because it's fact-based necessarily as as somehow news. But really, I mean, news that has an opinion to it, really is not the kind of news we're talking about. So, I mean, I think that, that line has been blurred along the way. And I think that that's what you distrust. But at the same time, that's why people trust Fox News. And that's why people trust MSNBC News. People trust Rachel Maddow. People trust Hannity, because in that case, they think what they're getting is news. Now, we want to say it isn't news. Okay. So, make that distinction. And so, I mean, I think that there is a way of trusting news if you understand what the standards of real news are. There was another part of that question, and that was what would happen if there weren't news anymore. I think I dealt with some of that. I mean, I think it'd be really difficult to have a discussion. Things would become very volatile very quickly because, we're already doing that. There's so much confirmation bias in our perception of news. I mean, we sort of glom onto the things that we already believe in that reinforce the things that we believe in. And that's, the facts that come in that's already, fits the things that we believe. And when you come down to, having to have to, discuss as a community certain things about, not only nationally, but very, very locally. I mean, there are certain values that come in conflict fairly quickly. I mean, take mask wearing, for example. I mean, unless you have a basis of facts that you can share, it's very, very difficult to get to the point of having a discussion about, the efficacy of masks, or why you should wear them, or why you should do social distancing, or why you should, avoid, contacts in close quarters. And I think that we're seeing that difficulty. Vaccination is going to be the same thing. I mean, what are the basis of facts that people who may disagree upon vaccination or refuse to be vaccinated or want to make people vaccinated or all of those things? What are the basis? I mean, it doesn't have to, you don't have to go far out of this county to know, or out of this city to know that you're going to have some real difficult discussions if you choose to discuss. And I think that one of the difficulties is, one, people may choose not to discuss anymore because, after all, well, we just can't agree on the facts. So I think if there's no effort to have facts and to work toward a universe of facts that people can agree on, I think we're just going to go into some sort of cultural war, unfortunately.
Um,
I'm grim. I'm sorry to be so grim
yeah,
about that.
well, inevitable somewhat. Thinking back on your career, the principles you began with, what's changed or hasn't changed, and what advice do you have for journalism students going out into the world? What's your process today look like in terms of how do you reach out to readers?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think when you start out, you're very idealistic. And on the best of days, I still am very idealistic that the truth shall make you free, which is really important. I mean, you really got to believe that if you, I mean, if you're doing outreach, if you're writing a news story or whatever, the whole point of having, doing this work is that people will read it, it will make a difference. And I think that that's something that, yeah, I mean, I started out, thinking about that, and on the best of days, I still think that. And if I get really, really sort of grim about things, I bring myself back by thinking, yeah, I mean, that's still an important thing to do. I think that that's the kind of thing that you have to believe in if you're a journalism student. But it's not just being a journalism student. You have to believe that if you're getting a Bachelor of Science, if you're going to do anything, you got to believe that. Maybe you don't have to believe if you're going to go into into finance and you're going to become a stockbroker or something. Maybe you don't have to believe that. But I think that if you are going to believe in anything that has the idea that you are going to make somehow a product or be part of a process that makes things better, then I think that, I mean, you got to believe that. And, for journalism students, I mean, I think it's a really tough time. I mean, where are you going to get a job? I mean, I think it's the most hardest thing to the prospects of going out and getting a real job in journalism is really tough. And I mean, I don't have the answer to that. The journalism profs, work on that. I mean, it's really sure. And, I mean, but for anybody who's starting out right now, I mean, whether you want to go into, into medicine, whether you're going to the environmental field, or whether you're going to journalism, or whether you want to go into the arts or all that kind of stuff. I mean, if you don't feel like you're going to make a difference and you're going to make it better, then I think it's really, really hard to actually get out there and do something. I think it's really hard to, it's hard in many, many ways because of COVID, but I think that, it's a really challenging time right now. But unless you feel as if, you can make a difference and work toward the good, I think that that's the only thing that's going to move us forward.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate your work and your optimism that it's possible still.
It is. Otherwise, how are you going to get up in the morning?
Exactly. Mike, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom, and we appreciate.
Well, I appreciate the time that all of you put in, and I really hope you've had the second gin and tonic and the second glass of wine, and now you can do whatever you want. Thank you very much.
Okay, good evening, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks,
Bye.
Mike.